Just a tiny bit of background to the research awards before we get down to the business of people talking about the candidates and them doing their presentations. The ENCAT Research Award was launched in 2014, and it has aims to stimulate academic research in the field of cultural management and policy with an emphasis on its applied implications. I could argue that policy is practice and practice is policy, but that's not a debate for now. We will accept these differences. The winning doctoral thesis being published in the ENCAT Advances in Cultural Management and Policy book series, edited by Routledge. Of the 13 editions, we have received applications from candidates from more than 25 countries. So in the time I've been with ENCAT, it's moved from specifically a small number of European countries to becoming global. And I think that's going to expand and increase, which is great, because it brings in perspectives not just to the Congress, but it brings in global perspectives to our publication as well. One odd, not an odd thing, but an observable thing, is that the last 11 winners of the award have been women. This will be the first year with 2 male finalists. Read into that what you like.
Equity.
Right, I would now like to hand over to Eleanor Morin to start the introduction for our candidates.
So thank you, Gerald, and a very big thank you to all the PhD candidates, now PhD holders, who submitted their PhD thesis for this award. It was really a pleasure as a member of a jury to read all these interesting proposals to all these interesting theses. And it's my pleasure now to introduce one of the 2 finalists, João Leiva Filho. So João is a Brazilian researcher and cultural entrepreneur. He holds a degree in economics from the University of Sao Paulo, a master's degree in cinema from the University of Sao Paulo, and a master's degree in cultural management from the Open University of Catalonia in Spain. So in early 2024, João completed his PhD at Goldsmiths, University of London, at the Institute for Creative and Cultural Entrepreneurship. He has worked as a journalist for newspapers such as Folha de Sao Paulo and Valor, and in communication for the Secretariat of Culture of the State of Sao Paulo. And he founded his consultancy company, G. Leiva Cultura and Esporte. So João has conducted numerous non-academic investigations in the cultural sector in Brazil, including mapping theater productions and independent music venues in the city of Sao Paulo, and the job market for professionals in the animation industry. João has also led several studies on cultural engagement in Brazilian cities. So thank you, João. So I leave the floor now to Jaime, Professor Gutierrez, who will introduce the second finalist.
Thank you, Elena. Let me introduce another candidate. Is Jordi Sanjuán Belda. He is an economist with a master in economic policy and public economics and a PhD in social science from the University of Valencia. He holds a data science certificate from Harvard University. He has worked as a consultant in cultural economics at the specialized consulting firm Cultural Link and as a quantitative analyst at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission in Ispra, Italy. He is currently a postdoctoral researcher in the Department of Applied Economics at the University of Valencia and is a member of the research unit on cultural economics and tourism, Econcult, where he has participated in European projects such as MESOC and measuring CCS. His research focuses mainly on the impacts of cultural and creative industries on well-being. Thank you.
Now I have the honor to invite one of the two finalists, so João Leiva Filho, to present his thesis, 50 Years Measuring Cultural Engagement, Contributions, Gaps, and the Future of Survey. So João, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Buon pomeriggio a tutti. It is an honor to be one of the finalists of the ENCATC Research Award. Thank you for all the ENCATC team for this opportunity. I'm also proud to share this session with Jordi Belda, who develops an important and challenging investigation on culture and well-being. My thesis explores the cultural access and participation social surveys, that I call CAPS. They are the main public open source data set that measures if people engage or not in cultural activities and their social and economic profiles. My aim was to go through their 50 years of history to assess three broad questions: their main contributions for our knowledge about cultural engagement, the information we'd like to have but they don't provide, and reflect if they still have a role to play on the topic. I also hope to call attention to the lack of data in my country. I've used 4 qualitative tools to assess one quantitative tool. Content analysis was used throughout the dissertation, but particularly to address the history of the surveys, their social and political life. Desk research was used to map as many surveys as possible. My objective here was to understand their reach and trajectory over the years, explore their methodological decisions, and consolidate fragmented information into one single source. Comparative analysis allowed me to dive into the questionnaires of 2 continental surveys and 6 national surveys from the global north and south. The objective was to detail what is being measured and how, not the results, but the questions they asked people, the concept of culture and arts they embrace. Finally, I've spoken throughout video calls with 32 researchers and policymakers from 9 countries working with a semi-structured questionnaire that allowed me to reflect on CAP's social life and political life and on their technical gaps and challenges. Regarding the mapping, my research has located 444 surveys in 45 countries, from Uganda to Germany, Costa Rica to Italy, Colombia to Romania, Austin to Vienna. This data set has shown that mostly are national studies, with samples varying from 1,000 to 30,000 interviews. Despite the face-to-face and phone interviews, there is a growing trend towards online surveys. Some countries also include qualitative methods. It also called my attention to 2 important questions. First, the only examples of regional surveys developed regularly for some decades were from Quebec and Catalonia. Their series were initiated in the 70s and 80s, in Quebec even before the first national Canadian study. The motivation is associated to identity questions, particularly the language, one of the founding pillars of most cultures. These cases deserve further investigation. The mapping also highlighted studies lost or not yet digitized in key Asian and European countries. The comparative analysis highlighted the key ways CAPs address cultural engagement: access and participation. Roughly speaking, while in access people is part of an audience, in participation they actively engage in cultural activities. These measurements connect to 2 paradigms in cultural policies: democratization of culture and cultural democracy. In access, we could spotlight 3 topics present in all questionnaires, each containing several similar variables: high culture, like theater, museums, music; cultural industry or mass media, like cinema, TV, the internet; and popular culture, popular festivities, and also street festivities and leisure activities. Most of these variables, with all their limitations and gaps I highlight in my text, could be considered clear and easy to understand, particularly the ones in the first 2 groups. Regarding participation, the scenario becomes trickier to measure. I've organized the different variables adopted by the countries in 3 main topics: hobbies, courses, and community activities. This reflects the challenge to build simple and clear variables to assess participation. Some studies also include questions about donations, volunteer work, and collections. The CAPs have made important contributions to our understanding of cultural engagement. They have underpinned the first theory in the sociology of culture, Bourdieu's concept of distinction. They have highlighted education and income as key variables influencing engagement. They have supported the first theory to question Bourdieu's homology, Peterson's omnivorous theory, demonstrated that women and young people engage more with culture than men and older adults, and emphasized the importance of experiencing culture in childhood. Considering policymaking, they've helped to inform about cultural inequalities, to justify the democratization of culture agenda, to support administrative decisions, and to raise awareness about long-term trends like amateur practices. One important point here, politically, the CAPs have shown inconvenient findings. Initially, they revealed significant cultural inequalities, supporting the push for democratizing culture. Despite the policies facing these inequalities, CAPs have not shown the expected results. A British interviewee highlighted this as a major finding of the surveys. Built to flag the positive results from government initiatives, the CAPs have instead been used by their critics to underscore their shortcomings. This happened in France and also in England. Which are the gaps pointed by the interviewees? The most critical issue is their geographic distribution. They are nationally designed, not having a sample size robust enough to allow for regional breakdowns, what is key for policymaking. Considering the activities not or poorly measured, 3 topics were noted. Popular culture, a topic limited by the regional gap, participation, something difficult to define and to measure, and the digital, a topic spotlighted in all conversations. Finally, they underscored CAP's limitations to explore subjective questions like value and impact of cultural engagement. Regarding CAP's social life, interviewees were almost unanimous on saying that there is prejudice against the use of data in the cultural area. Data will not be able to assess their intangible values. One researcher said ideology, not prejudice, would be a better word. Economists and statisticians would also resist to explore the area as some of their tools would be challenged by the fluidity of culture. Prejudice or ideology would result in a lack of professionals skilled both in culture and quants, contributing to CAP's underuse, both in academy and for policymaking. Another critical issue is data dissemination. Long reports and the lack of tailored studies focused on particular areas or social demographic segments would hinder CAP's use by professionals not skilled in quants. The data would not move from figures in a sheet to knowledge. Could the CAPs still inform us about cultural engagement? All interviewees said that yes, they can, but it is clear they've gotten to a limit, almost to a turning point. There is too much to account for. Participation and digital habits would justify exclusive surveys. They are efficient to measure access, one thing happening in one place, but they are not accurate in measuring other variables. And today, there are new techniques like big data. The problem is that in most cases, they are in the hands of big tech companies. I went with some suggestions that may improve CAP's quality and usability. Start by having a clear focus among the multiple possibilities. Collaborate from the beginning with academics and policymakers to increase the likelihood of the data to be used. Mix the CAPs with qualitative and other quantitative methods. Address CAPs dissemination as a particular step of the study. They should be accessible to at least 3 stakeholders: economists and statisticians, researchers and cultural professionals not trained in quants, and other public bodies and the media. Build bridges between culture and data. Finally, be local and focus on social groups, not in detriment of national surveys, but it's key to stimulate regions to develop studies according to their needs. If we consider the experience of engaging with arts, culture, and creativity of immeasurable value, it's reasonable to measure how many people have engaged with it and how many have not. If there is a politics of the use of data on culture, there is also a social, economic, and political risk of not using it. Thank you.
Well, hello. Thanks for giving me the opportunity of presenting a brief summary of my PhD thesis to you. Just like as a panoramic overview, because we don't have much time. Sorry, what was I? No, that's it's correct. Thanks. Well, as you all know, culture and creative industries are often claimed to cause a huge variety of impacts on several dimensions that affect well-being. But there's also a lack of consistent, generalized, systematized evidence, empirical evidence on that. So I wanted to corroborate this, starting from the hypothesis that CCIs do have a positive causal impact on several dimensions of well-being, and they are therefore capable of activating a virtuous cycle of well-being in the territories where they are located. So this was the main objective of the PhD thesis, to identify and also to quantify those impacts. That was the main challenge. And this was also very aligned and embedded in a European project called MESOC, Measuring the Social Dimension of Culture. So this is the structure of the thesis. It has 8 chapters divided in 3 parts. The first one, in the theoretical framework, I started by defining the main concepts, the cultural and creative industries, the well-being, and how they relate. Then there are 3 chapters for the methodology, explaining the data, the causal models, and the techniques. And finally, the results are presented with some discussion, implications, and policy recommendations derived from them. I'm going to skip the definition of cultural and creative industries because with this audience you all perfectly know. As for well-being, I use the Better Life Index because it's based on the capabilities approach, and its 11 dimensions cover a wide range of several essential pillars of well-being, including material conditions, but also living in community, the subjective self-assessment of life, of subjective well-being, and also, of course, the sustainability of well-being over time, which is the main topic of this conference. Up to now, there has been a lot of studies regarding the effects of culture or certain forms of cultural participation on several domains of well-being, mainly from a micro perspective in most of them, but there are some areas like health or subjective well-being where this has been deeply studied. But when it comes to the cultural and creative industries as a whole, as a part of the economic structure, the research has mainly focused on the economic aspects, and there were still some important gaps in the literature that I wanted to overcome with this thesis. Going to the methodology, I used data from 2008 to 2019, and the territorial scope was the result of the intersection of the 2 main sources of data. I used the labor force survey for the data of employment in CCIs, and the Better Life Index for the indicator of well-being. The first one is available for Europe, the second is available for the OECD countries, so the European OECD countries was the result, with 209 regions. I'm not going into detail with the techniques, but I used one of the most advanced algorithms of causal machine learning, which is called causal forest, mainly because of different advantages. One of them is that it allows for causal interpretations of the results, which was the aim. It also reaches high levels of accuracy because of the flexibility of the algorithm, and it also allows to distinguish between the heterogeneity of impacts across the regions, which was also our aim. I cannot explain all the causal models because there are 11 dimensions and therefore 11 causal models, but they are deeply grounded on literature, both from the theoretical reasoning and from on the empirical evidence. Going to the results, the effects are positive in all, on average they are positive in all the dimensions, but with different intensities, being the biggest effect on education. So yes, we can say that cultural and creative industries can enhance well-being. This is the first main finding. But what is really interesting about the results beyond the average effects is the heterogeneity of the effects across regions, depending on several features. For example, depending on the present level of cultural and creative employment in its region. That is, will the effect be higher when we start at a low level until and then decline when it reaches a certain saturation level, for example, or is it necessary to reach a critical mass in order to start generating effects? Well, it depends on the dimension. There are several patterns. I also checked if there were significant differences according to the sectors that we were including in the cultural and creative industries, because I know this is a very controversial topic with some activities that should or not should or shouldn't be considered cultural and creative. So I distinguished two subgroupings of activities within the cultural and creative industries. One of the most canonical core cultural activities with, let's say, biggest strictly artistic component, and the rest of the activities more linked to intellectual property, with a strongest technological component and more market-oriented. For most of the regions, the effects are quite similar, but there are also some important differences in some of them, especially, for example, in environment, where the effect of the core cultural activities is indeed negative. But on the contrary, for the most economic dimensions, like income and jobs, it has the greatest effect due to the central role of culture in the innovation systems as facilitators and generators of new ideas. And we can also see how the effects are particularly distributed across regions. For example, in this case, for health, with the indicator of life expectancy, we can see that culture can make us live longer, but not in all regions. Depending on, this is due to several reasons, but also, for example, because the type of cultural consumption and cultural participation can be different. It's not the same reading books, the effect of reading books, or going to music festivals, for example. So there's much to investigate about this. But if we simply count the number of dimensions in which the effects are positive in each region, we can see that they are mostly positive in most of them, but there are interesting regional patterns that are worth investigating further. So in conclusion, the effects are positive for all the, on average at least, for all the analyzed dimensions. That means that cultural and creative industries have the potential to improve regional well-being in multiple domains, but there's also a great heterogeneity across regions, including also some potential adverse effects, so we must be cautious about this. And it is also very relevant, the definition of which activities do we include in the cultural and creative industries, because the effect may differ between some activities and others. So the policies need to take all this into account. Of course, the research has also its limitations, mainly due to the sample selection, because we are analyzing OECD European countries, that is high-income countries. Maybe the results are not, cannot be directly applied to other contexts. And well, the PhD has finished, but the research is still ongoing, so the next steps include expanding the database with new years, new countries, new indicators. I also want to explore the contribution of the other variables, the control variables, and how they affect to the final effect of the CCIs, or analyzing the internal distribution of the well-being outcomes when possible, for example, by gender or by income level. So in short, this is a thesis that offers novel knowledge that I believe is relevant both not only from an academic perspective, but also for an economic, policy, and social perspective. And besides, it opens up new avenues and possibilities for further research, making it a leading, forward-looking research. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you both. Jordi, we're going to start with you. We're just going to do a Q&A, and folks, looks to me like we're 2 minutes ahead of schedule, so we're going to use every minute we have here. Jordi, I'm going to start with you. Great job on the presentation. I appreciate that.
Thanks.
What's the role that the regional variations play and the effectiveness on CCIs? I know that was something that you brought up in your research and what it had to offer.
Yes, I think it plays a central role because we cannot expect the same results in one region or another. That is one of the main contributions contribution of this thesis, because maybe in some dimensions of well-being, the results can be negative. I mean, the effect of cultural and creative industries can be negative. That does not mean that we have to renounce to all the other positive effects that we can get from them. But this must be taken into account when making policies, because maybe, for example, there are some important regional differences with the housing effects. When I didn't have time to analyze all this in this presentation, but one of the results was that when the level of cultural and creative industries in the region gets really high, the effects on housing turn negative, because probably because of gentrification processes, and it also tends to be negative in the very urban regions. So we must take this into account, and coordinating these policies of promotion of CCIs with other policies that address all these potential adverse effects that can also occur.
I know you mentioned casual forest in your research, and I'm going to press it. Okay. Let's talk about machine learning and the effect of machine learning to improve the understanding, because that was a mention of what you were looking at.
Yes, I think machine learning opens up a lot of possibilities for getting information about things that we considered unreachable some years ago, and now they are. It is possible to get information about these things. For example, about how a certain policy or can have different effects on one place or another, and not just expecting the general results that we could obtain till now. And for example, there are other algorithms of machine learning that allow us to know why it is higher the effect in one region or another, how a certain variable makes that multiplies or makes lower that effect. So I think it's a very powerful tool. Well,
It's going to be used a lot more in the future,
yes.
I imagine. It's going to be built into...
And there will be many more tools that need to be used in order to get all the information that we can get from data that we don't even imagine it.
What was your biggest surprise or takeaway from the research? Because you were pretty deep into looking at all the different areas.
I was really surprised that sometimes there were some counterintuitive results in some regions, because when cultural and creative industries, the effects on health, for example, I would have expected to be positive in all the regions, but then you see that there are some regions where they are not, and there are other similar regions where they are positive, and you ask, what's the difference between this region and the other one? And when you start analyzing it, you start getting answers to those questions, and I have really found it really amazing, but it was really surprising at the beginning.
I think with both of these, us on the research committee were impressed with the lift that you both did, because it was a lot to examine. Let me pivot over to your partner here. So I'm curious, why aren't, you said 45 countries were currently using CAPS. Why aren't more countries embracing that?
Well, I could find surveys, CAPS surveys, in like 45 countries. It doesn't mean that it's all
Oh, there
only...
might still be, others might be using.
Yes, okay. But I think that what makes one country decide to use it is mostly you can find these surveys in developed countries, European countries, and it's basically a tool for an urban environment. So for example, in rural areas, it's less likely that countries that have a large rural population will use tools like that. And one thing that I think it's important, not decisive, but important, is to have a department of culture. Someone must be in charge of culture to decide to use that, and it helps a lot if you have like a statistical department. That's what happened in France, in Canada, in Quebec, in England, and I think in Spain also. You need to have a kind of someone that is in charge of collecting this data. If possible, inside the Department of Culture. Because sometimes you have, like in Brazil, we have a statistical department, but it's apart from the department.
Did you find it difficult finding some of these because they were from 30 years ago, or?
Yes and no. It's difficult to find the old surveys,
yeah.
But at the same time, with the internet, I could find surveys in a lot of countries.
Some things
that
probably weren't digitized at the time.
Yes.
And you have to kind of be a detective.
Yes, and exactly. And I think that in the US, you have most of the surveys digitized. I think you have like 1 or 2 surveys from Lewis Harry Foundation that started to do surveys in the US, or from the Ford Foundation that are not digitized. But when you start to come to this century, most of them are available. But even the UK, there are some lost surveys.
Well, that's a nice pivot for us, because you mentioned digital participation, and I'm wondering, given the rise of what's happening in streaming and media, how would you adapt that to measure? Because that's a whole nother area that in 2024 is really important, but
yes,
maybe wasn't 20, 30 years ago.
Honestly, answering to your question, I don't think they can adapt.
There's just too much.
It's just too much. It's just too much, because when you're talking about...
Although we could use machine learning.
Yeah.
That could be a way to do it.
Yeah. The problem is that we have to speak with people from Spotify and from YouTube to give us access to the data.
And they don't always want to do that.
Yes, because as I mentioned, if you're talking about one thing that I can do in one place, it's easier to measure. Because the measurement that these surveys use, it's like the last 12 months. When you're talking about the digital, the last 12 months doesn't make any sense. The last month probably doesn't make any sense. Also, so it's difficult to find a measure to understand what's happening, and the digital is something that you are interacting all the time during the day, so it's like a really, really critical. You have to use big data.
Yes. You mentioned the ideological bias that occurs on quantitative data and cultural studies that might be there. How can the academic community overcome this prejudice?
Doing what you're doing here. You have two economists
right.
here, so I think you are recognizing the importance of this kind of work. But I really believe you have to build bridges. I think the content that economists are producing have to be more accessible to people not experienced in
digest
in
it.
data. Yes, just so you can to have a good conversation. To explain people, because many times, for example, when I present some of my surveys, in the beginning I was using like traditional tables, and people were sleeping in the presentations. I was helping them to relax, but they couldn't get access to the content, and then I started to try to change the way to present them, because it's hard to understand for a person that was trained in a different area.
Yeah. I want to also ask you, as we wrap up the same question, like, what was your big surprise? I know when you do research like this, there's a lot of light bulbs going off. There's a lot of things. But is there something you could share with us that might...
When they lost surveys, I thought that, for example, in countries like the UK or in Spain, this wouldn't happen. And it happens, like in Japan also. This was the first. The second was a question regarding the disclosure of the data, because many of the interviewees that I have the opportunity to speak with, they complained about the lack of data about participation in cultural activities. And in fact, most of the surveys have this data. Then I started to realize that it has something to do with the way data is disclosed. People only give some attention to data of access. If you take a report, it's all access, and the data of participation at the end summarized in 1-2 pages with all the cultural activities. This, I think it was one point. Second, the quality of the data of participation, it's not as good as it
That's got to be massive for you, because you don't know what instrument they're using and how long ago it was.
Exactly. And the third thing was this question about the regional surveys. I think the cases of Quebec and Catalonia are very interesting. I didn't have the opportunity to compare the results from Spain, Catalonia, and Barcelona, because there are also some surveys done in the city of Barcelona to check if we can improve the usability of that data once we move from the country to a region and to a city.
Quebec does not want to be thrown into all of Canada.
Yes, but in the two cases, you have a question of language, like pushing the aim to do a regional survey apart from the national survey. And in Quebec, it was made before. And in Quebec, they literally copy everything that France was doing at the time. So they have, I think in the case of Quebec, it's the first regional survey I could find. And in Catalonia, I couldn't explore all the politicals.
French, and the rest of Canada was in English, or no?
No, they did only the survey in Quebec.
Only in Quebec, okay.
And then years after, the national government made a kind of a national survey.
That's great. Thank you. Because we're a little bit early on time, I wanted to see if anyone had any questions for these two folks. Anything that you'd like to ask, panelists? Otherwise, yes, please.
Is there time? I have two short questions to each one of you. So, Jordi, I was really intrigued by this finding of potential negative effect of CCIs on life expectancy. So, makes shorten the life of the political leaders. And to João, I've working with surveys, I felt there's sometimes a lot of confusion between the notion what is access and what is participation. So I would like to ask you, after seeing so many surveys, what is your distinction or definition of access versus participation, just to really pinpoint this delicate area? Shall I start? Well, thanks for your question. I don't have the short answer, because I think I need to investigate further, especially with all the other variables that play a role in that model. But one idea that I think that could be behind that is that when we think about the cultural and creative industries, we think of culture. We have like an abstract idea, but the composition can be very different, and the different types of cultural participation can also have different outcomes in terms of health. For example, attending to music festivals, for example, for several days, that can be very linked to alcohol consumption, drugs consumption. Just to say an example, watching TV many hours a day can incentivize sedentary behaviors. Not every aspect of cultural and creative industries will be necessarily positive for health, for example, but for health and on other dimensions. But the results in general is that they are mostly positive. That is the main finding, as as several studies from the micro perspectives and from certain cultural participation forms already had said that. But not always, depending on several characteristics, not always will be that the result.
Well, this was one key question when I was trying to define my theoretical framework, and then I started to realize that the best thing I had to do was not to be worried in the beginning with these concepts, and to look to the surveys, what they are asking about cinema, theater, this and that, and then I started to make some reflect on these questions, to look to how the questionnaires were organized, and I got to these two concepts. I don't know if I can say concepts, because as I mentioned, it's roughly trying to split them. When you are in attendance, you are part of an audience, right? And in participation, you are actively engaging. But of course, if you are someone that reads about theater, that goes to a lot of plays and is really interested in the topic, you are actively engaging with culture. It's not because you are part of an audience that you are passively looking at it. So I think it's difficult. It's more. I think we use it more as a practical tool in some investigations. That is something that we really need to define exactly. And when we connect these two ways of engaging with culture, with cultural democracy and the democratization of culture, we are doing the same exercise. You have a lot of researchers that try to avoid this dual distinction and defending like a more dialectical interaction between these two. So Luis here, he's one of the researchers that has this kind of approach, that a more dialectical interaction between these two ways of engaging with culture. I think it's more we as researchers that create this kind of boxes to put the activities because it's easier to deal with them.
Yes.
We have to create our boxes. Without them, it's difficult.
So we have to make it.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop there, but they're going to be around, so you can ask them at dinner your question. I'm sure it's good. I want.
Can I
Sure,
add a
of
point
course.
to the previous question?
Yes.
Just very brief. The only dimension of well-being in which the effects were positive for all the regions was education, just to leave that.
Well, that's inspiring knowing this crowd. So that's a good way for us to end. You guys both did such a lovely job. This applause you're hearing is for you two. Do you hear it? Here it comes.